Welcome to this new episode of Unleashed. Some years ago, I was working with a CIO of a very large manufacturing company, a very large legacy company, run very traditionally, has many very experienced, very senior employees who have been with the organization for many years. As a part of its modernization efforts, the CEO and the CIO decided to bring in many interesting new emerging technologies, including AI, including PLMs, including IoTs, into the operations of the company. Many of them were successfully deployed and implemented. They used external vendors, they used consultants to come and deploy them. I was invited to work with the CIO to help him get these new technologies implemented to be put to use. In all this process of bringing in this emerging technologies, the stakeholders, the business users, the traditional employees of the company were not carried through these changes. Neither did they relate to these changes from their business context, nor did they understand the potential of them and how that can bring improvements to where they do the business. So while potentially these technologies were implemented, they were not put to use. So my entire work with this CIO was how to do the change management. My entire work with this CIO was how to map back to the stakeholders. My entire work with this CIO was to ensure that the businesses own this change and put them to use. This has been a fascinating issue, not just in the recent times when so many emerging technologies happening, but it's always been there as an issue, has always been there as a problem which companies rarely really effectively have put to use. Many years ago, I was working with a client, a large manufacturing company, who wanted to bring huge change in the way they deliver on time. They wanted to improve their delivery on time from 85% on time to about 95% on time. While they already chosen certain sets of technologies, they hoped that by implementing those changes, the improvement will automatically happen. What we then realized that to bring that change, the technology was just not adequate. We had to first ensure that the ownership of change is effectively transferred at every stage to the end stakeholders step by step. So right from prioritizing the areas that need to be addressed, to the nature of changes that need to happen, to the changed environment, how it looks, we involved the stakeholders to ensure that they have bought into it and they signed out of it stage by stage. So when it went live, there was no surprises. At the same time, we also ensured that 36 parallel projects had to be taken up, because without those projects, simple technology implementation wouldn't bring the desired results of 85% to 95% delivery on time. Some of the projects had to include like reducing the SKUs of the organization from about 1 million to 30,000. Some of the projects included reducing the vendors and bringing vendors closer to the organization. Some of the projects included relaying the shop floor so that the flows are much better. We had to do so many other parallel projects along with the technology changes, along with the process changes, along with carrying the people. Then and then only the potential of the implementations could be fully leveraged and we could successfully help the company move from 85 to 95% delivery on time. So change management is at heart of getting the full value of any new technology, full value of any new models of business. Until then, until all stakeholders are carried and until all necessary changes around the organization are made and trade-offs are understood, the impact of any technology does not happen effectively. In this episode, I have the honor of talking to Pankaj Rai, who led a lot of changes at his Aditya Birla Group in bringing in data culture. I have the honor of talking to Dan. Dan involves in my earlier episodes around building brand and presence. He shares his experiences of building one of the initial GCCs back in India, by carrying the stakeholders, ensuring that they understand the benefit of a GCC for their larger company. I also have the pleasure of talking to Praveena Ravanavarapu, who had this extensive experience of bringing in data culture in one of the largest organizations across the world. She shares how she builds in data culture, brings in sophisticated data approaches to different organizations. In the first episode, there are several segments as a part of ensuring effective change management. One of the first steps we do when we want to change manage is to align the entire change project, whether it is bringing in new technologies, whether it is putting a GCC, or whether it's bringing in data culture, or bringing in some kind of a developmental change to the world. It has to align to the larger vision and strategy of the company. So, one of the first kickoff workshops when we do an effective change management is to align it to the bigger picture and drive every change from the bigger picture perspective. The challenge the CIO I worked with was that this changes of IoT, changes of AI introductions into their organization was more driven from an IT perspective, was never aligned to the bigger business objectives of the stakeholders. Therefore, the stakeholders did not see these transformational projects affecting their top lines or bottom lines because it was not aligned to them. In my discussions with Pankaj Rai, in my discussions with Dan, in my discussions with Praveena, I bring out the importance of how the tying up to the larger strategy, driving it from top down, is critical for any of these changes to be effective. In this episode, they will share their approaches they have taken to tie up this to the larger picture of the business, to tie up this to the bigger strategy of the business, and therefore have ensured that their projects they are bringing in, the changes they are bringing in, are effectively born. In the next one, we'll go more detailed about how they ensure the stakeholders participate into this whole process. But in this particular episode, we'll talk about how it is driven top down. Pankaj drives this change across a large group with variety of businesses, with variety of operations, with variety of products and services. So bringing in change requires a structured framework to involve the whole group and tie it up to the group's successes and business strategies. He shares what framework he uses to actually drive it across and how he brings about very critical projects which are driven centrally, which will have an impact on multiple companies within the larger group.
I can explain the framework that we are using to drive this. We call it the cultural transformation. Given that we are a diverse group with so many different businesses, so many different people with different mindsets, businesses also in different stages of evolution. So very diverse, and some new and some very old. Within the old ones also, there could be new divisions or new factories and some really old ones. So the diversity here is at very, very many different axes. So the question in front of us was that what is it that you can do which can bring it all together? So we said that just like any other cultural transformation, the first thing that we need is to create a common language. Because otherwise, how do you bring people together? And I was a Six Sigma guy once upon a time in GE, and the common language those days used to be the DMAKE framework, define, measure, analyze, improve, control. So irrespective of where you were in the company, you knew this is the way to do it, and everyone spoke about it. You can learn from each other, all that. So I think this common language is a big theme. Now, it's not as if people were not doing things. They were all doing, some of them had their own language, if I can say so. But then we kind of spoke to many people and then adopted a framework, which is the Gartner framework. And this framework has three layers. The top layer basically asks you to create a digital ambition for the business, which is nothing but that you have a business strategy for 3 to 5 years. Sit down and see what all data, digital, all of these emerging technologies can do for you. So create a list of projects / priorities or programs which can accelerate your business ambition. And it could be in the domain of logistics or energy or customer acquisition. It could be anything. So whatever is your business ambition, can these technologies act as a grease or a catalyst to enable that? And therefore, what are those possible projects? And then classify these projects into three different parts. One we call the enablement one, which are simple automation type of things. Then the optimization one, which is slightly more complex. And then the transformational one, which are a few big ideas which can totally transform the business. And then to see, okay, so now this is your sort of business ambition, digital ambition, overall goal. So that's the one activity that you need to do. The second middle layer is really all about talent, culture, funding, decision right, governance, all of that. That whatever you do, you have to have some enablers, guardrails, which will allow you to make progress and sustain whatever you do. So those are the softer aspects of it. And the bottom layer is all the various technologies that you need to build capabilities in. It could be AR, VR, AI, any kind of technologies. So the way we started articulating this framework was that the top one is really the ways of thinking, the middle one is the ways of working, and the bottom one is the ways of doing. And they said that all of us are very focused on the ways of doing. We go, we get hold of a problem, and we start solving it. Sometimes we'll get funded to solve it. Sometimes we'll do it on our own. Sometimes we'll beg, borrow, steal from our neighbor or whatever. And that's fine. So people have been doing something on their own. But it is clear that we haven't been doing it in an organized way. So how do we go about doing this? So we said that in every place, let's start at the top. Let's try wherever, if you are a division or a function or a business at whatever level, let's try to determine your roadmap, some digital ambition. And the digital ambition doesn't have to be at the top of the house. It could be at any level, wherever you have the stakeholder who's interested in making progress. And then make those priorities. Out of those priorities, maybe the simple ones, the easy ones, you can train the people, train the employees through trainers to say, hey, we'll teach you. AR/VR technology will teach you. Some basic data analysis will teach you, and many things. So we train you so that you can develop those muscles and solve some of those yellow belt projects, if you can say so, on your own. The slightly more complex ones, maybe what we can do is we can do a few for you, but we can get vendors to do it for you. We can get some other businesses that have done it, and you can copy them and all of that. The transformational ones certainly require some focused attention, which is where a central team like us should probably play a bigger role, because whatever you do there is either an IP for you or an IP for the group, which can be cross leveraged. Given that we are a central team and we define our role as a coach and a player, but more coach, less player, because if we start to become run the business player, then we can't do it. So we have to really do a few things, but amplify the impact of what we do. So our strategy as a central team was to help develop the ambition, help them with getting a few things done through other vendor partners ecosystem, which we had started to create through our own mechanisms, and then ourselves working on either problems that are uniquely IP for the business or something that has group-wide impact. So the group-wide impact would be something, let's say you develop a track and trace feature in logistics. So everyone is having trucks across the group. So that track and trace feature will be, certainly you do it one place, you can use it. And you can think of in the energy area and customer area, wherever. So the framework that was emerging for us was that we will do projects, and some of these projects will have common themes, which will then get digitized and form horizontal platform, which will be reusable like a marketplace across the group. So by and large, on the procurement and supply chain side, then within the industry, the product quality, machine maintenance, energy side, and then the customer side are the three broad areas that started emerging, where we are creating digital features and digital platform, which will have reuse across the board. The approach there is that, let's say, I pick up logistics because that is the one which is gaining steam, that the logistics platform has sort of 16 themes within itself. All the features don't have to be made by us. Them can be made either by the company with whom we are working. It could be a startup partner that we can bring around. It could be any other player who has created a feature which we can use from the outside. So the platform is really a co-creation effort, bringing together diverse capability under a single architecture, which allows for reusability across the group. So that is the approach we are forming. So what this is going to do is that, let's say in this particular case, all the logistics leaders across group companies, and we have a dozen of them, can start to come together to form a logistics council to say we all own this platform, can help determine what the future should look like, what are the new features we should bring upon, and all of that. So the logistics council can start to become, it hasn't happened, but we expect it to become the guiding force to drive the agenda for this platform. Then we are training a lot of people at the lower level who are the practitioners across businesses to say, you guys should be developing features in line with the expectation that the leadership drives, because you need to develop those muscles inside. And again, there could be startups doing it or our team doing it and all that. We also think that we can take it a notch higher at the industry level, where a lot of industry players can come together along with government, because the government is also pushing a lot of emphasis on logistics. They are developing a ULIP platform unified across the nation and so on. So how do we get other industry players, the government, public and digital public infrastructure, and ourselves coming together to drive the national agenda also? So to me, what is appearing is that this is not just limited to a company, but to the group and to the nation. And the same idea you can take away to all others. So this is the type of picture that we are painting across the board.
Dan again talks about the top-down picture of how these are tied up, how the measures of the company, how the measures of the partners are all tied up to the project of, let's say, for example, in their case of bringing GCC, and ensures that these are being effectively integrated into way the companies are expected to grow and become more, leveraging the change that is going to come from this large change.
I'll address it from our center first, because that was the biggest capital investment that we as a firm undertook versus how we do this at perhaps a one-off at a client. So there were a couple. So if you think about what we did from a center perspective, so there were some important things that we needed to come in place. So the first thing that we needed to do was make sure that we had a standardized process, standardized work paper, standardized workflow on how we undertook a compliance engagement. Because at the time there were 50 offices in the US, and I would venture to say there were 50 different, actually it was more than 50, because every partner and perhaps every manager had their own process. So we had a myriad, and you can't put technology on a bad process, right? So the first thing that we needed to do was to fix the process, which we did. That was our first foray. Then the second was, okay, now that we have a standardized process and people are used to it, now we can overlay a technology platform to help facilitate that process. And there was a, kind of a SharePoint that served as the master repository, but then we had a lot of tools that were built in for certain of the processes, Excel workbooks and those types of things. So now we had a standardized process, we had a technology platform. Now we could say, all right, there's lower value or lower lifts on doing some of this work, and then there are higher technical work. And so is there a way to carve out maybe some of this lower level of work, kind of a paraprofessional role or, kind of a less accounting role, to help maybe do some of the number manipulation, looking at a lower cost solution to be able to do some of that lower lift work? For example, tax sensitizing the general ledger, right? And setting up some automatic book tax differences that are just the difference in it, right? Because book will treat this entire account different, tax will treat this account. And so I can just look at the change in the account. And again, we chose India for a lot of reason. Surplus talent, they spoke English, and they had a very stable democracy. The wage arbitrage is very significant, still remains very significant, maybe not what it was in 2012, but still very significant. And so now, we had a standardized process, we had standardized technology, but now all of a sudden, now we have set it up. Some of it is to educate the partners so that they understand the economics on why we are doing this. And again, some of the partners will see it, some of them will not. immediately. It does take some time, especially as the firm starts to raise its expectation of what an engagement margin would be.
Mm-hmm.
So as that engagement margin increased up, it was going to be much more of a challenge for the U.S. team to continue to use solely U.S. people at a higher cost and not leverage India. So there were a lot of different metrics that the firm used for the partners. And again, I'm doing this because it's very important, I think, to understand the partners versus the underlying staff, because in many cases the partner was disengaged, and so the staff could make their own decision, and that's why it became very important to handle it on a bifurcated basis. So we were tracking how much of the engagement was being done in the US and how much was being done in the shared service center, and they kept raising the expectation, right? It didn't go to 30% day one, but it was like, hey, we want 10% this year and then 20%. So there was always that expectation, and that was separately measured. But the economics, right, in being able to get the work done on a profitable basis by raising the margin expectation almost made it impossible for someone to be able to do that really just on the US, because there was not enough efficiency or hours that could make up for the wage arbitrage. So that was part of it. And I think we could have done a much better job of educating the partners. I think there was some reluctance to do that because I think there was a big fear that we would give that economic benefit dollar for dollar to our client. Right? And yes, again, very competitive, right? And you want to get the work. And if I can give my client a cheaper price, there's a better chance that I'm going to get the work. And so it would just be a total flow through. The firm would not be economically better off. The client is. The firm may not be getting the ROI that it expected in setting up the center. So there was definitely a tension there on sharing too much information or not enough information. I, on the other hand, said, look, they're owners of the business, and we ought to be able to have an owner conversation of why we're doing this, why it makes sense to do this, and what is the benefit to the firm and to them individually. The staff were, by and large, a harder sell, because now I've got a chargeable hour expectation, and you want me to send work over to the shared service center, and all of a sudden then I don't have anything to do. Or how am I going to learn and grow? Because the apprenticeship model had been, at least on the tax side, that you would do compliance, and by doing the compliance you'd elevate your tax understanding, then to be able to do maybe higher level consulting and analytical work. And now we're sending a lot of that initial work over to our shared service center, and then expecting a brand new staff person to review that work, when in fact they were less experienced and less knowledgeable than their Indian colleagues who were doing the work, who were by and large much more experienced. That also created an issue in the shared service center. The flip side is that we obtained certain engagements on a very inexpensive basis. They were very large, 7-figure engagements, but to win the work, right, our margins were very thin. And so therefore the only way to make it work was to leverage off of an Indian solution. And so those engagements wound up being uber successful because the team engaged with their Indian colleagues from the get-go. They were part of the plan. They were part of understanding the information flow, the milestones, who was doing what. And so there was a very integrated and collaborative approach to doing the work, versus a lot of it would be they throw it over the wall poor communication, poor directions, no upfront planning, no collaboration, and everybody's just throwing stuff over the wall, and nobody's really having a conversation or gaining a full understanding, leaving both sides displeased.
Yeah. Very interesting what you are summarizing. One, at a business strategic level, there were parameters, metrics, which were very closely tied up with the partner's performance. So there was an incentive for partners to probably follow this, something like this. And then until your go-to-market and your actual projects got integrated with this go-to-market, where I think this became a strategic competitive difference for you to win large projects, and therefore it became an integral part of how you deliver. That's when only the staffers also started realizing that this is the way we have to work and made it work. So I think it's very closely linked to business results in a way.
Very much. And there was one other and not only was it the large engagements, but if a particular office had some significant turnover, so therefore they were resource constrained in being able to do the work that they needed to do, there was a very proactive reach out, because India really was the only solution to help them serve their clients.
Correct. I think it had multiple. One was cost was an advantage. It also became a revenue advantage for you, go-to-market advantage. It also became a skills advantage, because whatever skills are lacking here, you are getting much richer skills elsewhere. So people would start addressing. So it is very close. What you're saying, whatever change you have brought in was so closely tied up to business at all levels. So everybody had certain results of theirs linked to this. And that's the best way to really get stakeholders on this side. Praveena drives technology transformation projects at some of the largest organizations in the world. She reiterates the importance of aligning the technology interventions with the larger business objectives. She, however, brings out the importance of wider operational changes and process changes that are critical for the success of any technology interventions. She specifically says that you cannot isolate the success of any change, the success of achievement of any object or not achievement of any business objective to technology alone. We have to see it in a holistic sense along with the operations, and then only we can understand the impact of the change being brought in. Here are my discussions with Praveena. There is a strong business case upfront. Yeah. And this is what it means to the business. This is what they can pass it back. How is it measured once you are implemented, brought in this change, let's say, given them more insights, given them more patterns to respond to a changing requirements of a customer? How are these measured, saying this investment obviously has helped them to make better decisions or help them to pass on better costs? Is there a correlation to their business plan? Is there a correlation to the progress they make? Is it measured to what is the final business impact?
So measurement is a little bit hard. So every product that we are going to deliver, we are going to make sure that we have some ROIs, right? So we do have the ROIs, and we make sure that we are holding that ROI. We are holding our stakeholders accountable to that ROI, because ROI is being produced with the combination of our product and the stakeholders. And sometimes those numbers might be inflated, and sometimes those numbers might be deflated or tangent because of several other things. Say, for example, I have a shrink, right? Shrink is like where a lot of things are going away from the stores, where a lot of people might steal or whatever the reason is, right? So if that is the biggest problem for any company, which is recently for any retail companies, we have several initiatives that we try to reduce that. Which initiative should we tackle it, saying that if shrink is reduced, which initiative do you think I can give the credit, right? So that's the reason.
So it's not directly correlate what you're releasing.
Yeah.
Directly correlation is the biggest thing. Yeah,
exactly. So that's part of it. So for me, and that's not only one thing, but second thing is I'm going to give you a report saying that, okay, there is a inventory problem in this particular store. But what I only can do is give you insights, right? But then the store associate needs to go fix the inventory. My merchandiser needs to go fulfill the inventory. So whom should I credit?
Correct. And are they doing it after that? So they decided not to put it. So The question I was more thinking is sometimes the readiness of the organization to put to use the readiness, so that's a domino effect. The changes that, so again, prioritizing, of course, there are 20 things, like you said, 20 things possible. Maybe out of these two things, prioritization becomes easier.
Yeah. And that's what's amazing right now. Retailers in general are honing in on those priorities, because with the constant customer changing, with the constant behavioral changes, we retailers are honing into those couple of things that will bring a bang, will get the bang for the buck. So there are so many low hanging fruits. It depends on the company to company. So I have worked in two different vast stakeholder company or customer oriented companies. The things will change from one company to another because the customer segmentation is different.
Correct.
From
the profile is different.
Yes. The profile is different, segmentation is different, and where the stores are different. So the thought process should be continuously changed. It should not be stagnant. And that's where I think some of us struggle, some of us don't. Right? Some of us try to go to the extreme, some of us tries to not even go anywhere. Right? Those are the different aspects that in general retailers are, but I'm lucky to say that the companies that I worked for, they are actually changing, or they have already changed the different phases of digitization they've been doing. Yeah.
So in this episode, we are largely focused on how you have to tie it up to the business vision, tie it up to the business objectives, tie it up to the strategies. Therefore, the change has a foundation in the strategy itself, and therefore has a role in delivering the strategy. This is the most effective step one has to take. It can't be independent of delivering the strategy or the direction of the company. In the coming episodes, we'll discuss more around engaging stakeholders, transferring ownerships, giving them highlights of what to expect, giving them more vision of what is the potential of the change. All that we will discuss in the upcoming episodes.